The sound came in like a knife, sharp and casual, slipping past my defenses before I even knew it was there. Beep, new voicemail. I pressed play, expecting a reminder about groceries, or maybe Daniel telling me he'd be home late. Instead, I heard the voices of my own son and his wife speaking about me as if I weren't a person at all. She's a burden, Daniel. I can't stand having her in this house anymore. Vanessa's voice snapped cold and irritated. My chest tightened, the mug in my hand slipping until it shattered on the kitchen tile. A burden. Was that what I had become? My Daniel, the boy. I, raised with sleepless nights and endless sacrifice, murmured back his words, muffled but clear enough to slice through me. I know. Dr. Oliver agreed to sign the papers. Once it's official, we can have her committed. No more problems. My name is Clara Mendoza, 64 years old, retired high school English teacher in San Antonio, Texas. For decades, I taught Shakespeare, Steinbeck, and Maya Angelou, reminding my students that words have the power to shape lives, to heal, or to wound. And now, here I was, gutted by the very words of my own son. I stood frozen in my modest kitchen, staring at the cracked floor tile, hearing the echo of their laughter on the recording. The same Daniel who used to sit on my lap while I corrected essays. The same Daniel for whom I sold my piano to pay tuition. That boy, my boy, was conspiring to erase me from my own life. It is a strange thing when the world tilts under your feet. The familiar walls of my home, painted in soft cream, suddenly pressed in like a prison. My heart wanted to break, to collapse under the weight of betrayal, but another voice rose inside me, quiet but steady. Not yet, Clara. Not like this. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I replayed the message again and again, each time hoping I'd misheard, each time confirming the nightmare. A burden, a problem. A patient to be, locked away. And worst of all, a mother no longer needed. I thought about the hundreds of mornings I woke at 5 a.m., packing Daniel's lunch before walking to the bus stop in the dark. I thought about the evenings I stayed up tutoring him when he swore algebra would be the death of him. And now at 64, my reward was to be written off as inconvenient clutter. But here's the twist. Daniel never expected I am not as weak as he believes. I may be gray-haired and my back may ache in the mornings, but I am still Clara Mendoza, the woman who faced down classrooms of rowdy teenagers and taught them the meaning of resilience. That night, as the Texas heat pressed through the thin window panes, I sat silently in my living room, the voicemail still on my phone like a poisonous seed. My hands shook, yes, but not from fear anymore, from resolve. I knew I couldn't confront them yet, not until I understood the whole of their plan. So I chose silence. I chose patience. I chose to let them believe they had fooled me. Because sometimes the greatest strength lies not in immediate reaction, but in waiting, watching, and preparing. And while Daniel and Vanessa thought they had already buried me, they had no idea I was just beginning to rise. When the silence of that night settled over me, I realized the betrayal I had heard was not born in a single moment. It had roots that stretched back through decades of choices, sacrifices, and illusions I had wrapped myself in. To understand why that voicemail cut me so deeply, you need to know the life that brought me here. I was 29 when my husband Javier died in a construction accident. One phone call, one broken promise, and suddenly I was a widow with 2 little boys, Daniel barely 8, and Miguel just 5. I remember standing in the hospital hallway, gripping their small hands while my world collapsed. Daniel's eyes brimmed with questions I couldn't answer. Miguel clung to my skirt, trembling. That day I promised myself I would carry them both, no matter the weight. I taught English at the local high school, reciting Shakespeare by day, grading papers by night, and scrubbing floors at Rosa's diner on weekends to pay bills. Rosa, my neighbor, my sister, and everything but blood, watched me stumble home each evening, hands raw, feet blistered. Clara, she'd whisper, "You'll break yourself." And I would smile even when my body ached and say, "For my boys, I'll give until there's nothing left." Over the years, I sold everything that tied me to a softer life. My father's antique book collection with leather-bound spines that smelled of history. I let them go one by one, each sale funding another semester for Daniel. My piano, the one Javier had given me on our 10th anniversary, the instrument I used to play lullabies on when the boys couldn't sleep, I sold it too. Daniel wanted law school, and I told myself no dream was too costly if it meant lifting him higher. Miguel was different. Sweet, stubborn Miguel. School never fit him. His hands longed for grease and engines, not textbooks. He dropped out, became a mechanic, and though he worked hard, Daniel sneered at him. Blue collar, he said, as if that were shame. I scolded Daniel for his arrogance, but in my heart, I too clung to him as my great hope. He was the polished son, the one I believed would justify every sacrifice I'd ever made. Looking back now, I see the irony as sharply as glass. I gave Daniel everything, money, faith, pieces of my soul. And Miguel, who asked for so little, gave me quiet loyalty, fixing my car without charging a dime, carrying groceries to my porch without fanfare. But I was blind with love, blind with ambition for the son I thought would save us all. Rosa would sometimes sit with me on her porch, watching the boys wrestle in the yard. Clara, she'd sigh, the one who shines brightest isn't always the one who will warm you when night comes. I laughed back then, dismissing her old country wisdom. But now her words echo in my chest, heavy and undeniable. That night after the voicemail, I finally admitted it to myself. I had built Daniel into my idol, my reason, my fragile hope, and maybe without knowing I had taught him that my life was his to take. But what Daniel didn't know, and what Vanessa could never guess, was that the woman who once sold her soul for her children was not gone. She had only been waiting for the moment to rise again. The memory of those sacrifices still lingered like ghosts in my chest when the changes began. At first they were subtle, so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining them, but the truth has a way of knocking louder and louder until you can't ignore it anymore. After Daniel married Vanessa, the warmth I once felt from him began to cool slowly at first, then all at once. The son who used to call me every Sunday grew distant. His words clipped his visits shorter, and Vanessa, with her perfect hair and rehearsed smile, began weaving herself into every decision, every conversation, every corner of my home. Daniel, she would say, her voice dripping with charm, this house is too small, too outdated. We could sell it and buy something grander, something that reflects who we are. She always said we, as if my home, the one I had paid for brick by brick, was already hers. Daniel never corrected her. That silence cut deeper than any insult. I noticed, too, the invitations that never came. Rosa would mention she had seen them at a barbecue or a birthday party. Strange you weren't there, Clara, she'd say, gently, her brows knitting with concern. I would smile, shrug, and pretend it didn't sting. But inside, it hollowed me out. A mother reduced to an afterthought. Then came the bank notices, statements with withdrawals. I hadn't made inquiries I hadn't authorized. At first, I thought it was a clerical error, but the letters kept coming, always with Daniel's name hovering near mine like a shadow. When I asked him, he laughed it off. Just helping you manage Mom. You're too trusting with money. His words, meant to sound protective, tasted of condescension. And then, as if to tighten the noose, Vanessa brought strangers into my life under the guise of care. One morning, a woman in scrubs appeared at my door, clipboard in hand, saying she was there to check my blood pressure to evaluate my daily routines. I never asked for her. Yet Vanessa insisted, "It's for your own good, Clara. At your age, you can't be too careful." That was when he entered the picture, Dr. Oliver. Smooth-talking always, with a sympathetic tilt of the head, as if he'd already decided I was fragile, confused, fading. I didn't know then that he was Vanessa's old friend, the same man whose name I would later hear in that cursed voicemail. But even in those early visits, something in his eyes unsettled me. He didn't look at me like a patient. He looked at me like paperwork. Little by little, my home began to feel less like mine. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Whispered words drifted through hallways, always cut short by forced smiles when I appeared. I told myself it was stress, money troubles, the strain of marriage. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But deep down I knew. These weren't accidents. These weren't oversights. They were steps, deliberate, calculated steps, to push me out of my own life. And the most terrifying part, I had no idea how far they were willing to go. The whispers, the doctors, the unexplained withdrawals, I tried to brush them aside, to believe they were mistakes, coincidences. But the truth rarely stays buried for long. It claws its way out sometimes in the most ordinary ways. For me, it came through the sharp ping of a voicemail notification. It was late afternoon. The sun bled through my lace curtains, casting golden patterns across the living room floor. I had been brewing chamomile tea, trying to soothe the ache in my chest that never seemed to leave anymore. When the phone buzzed, I picked it up, half expecting a reminder from the pharmacy or Rosa checking in. Instead, I saw Daniel's name. My heart lifted, maybe he was finally calling just to hear my voice. I pressed play, and in an instant the fragile illusions I had been clinging to crumbled. "Vanessa, once the papers are signed, it's done. Mom won't even know what hit her," Daniel's voice said, calm, businesslike, as if he were talking about a contract, not his own mother. Vanessa's laugh followed, sharp and careless. $600,000 for that old place in downtown San Antonio, Daniel. "With that money, we can spend 3 months in Europe, finally live the life we deserve." "Who cares what happens to her?" My knees buckled. I slid down to the rug, the phone trembling in my hand. Europe, vacations, freedom. All built on my ruin. Then came the words that froze my blood. Daniel again, steady calculating. Dr. Oliver already agreed to sign off on the report. Early dementia, declining judgment. Once that's filed, we'll have guardianship. She won't have a choice. We'll move her into St. Mary's home, and she'll be out of our lives for good. St. Mary's. A private nursing facility I had once donated to, thinking I was helping abandoned seniors. And now my son was planning to exile me there using forged papers and lies. I sat there in the fading light, replaying the message until the battery drained. Each repetition drove the knife deeper. The boy I had loved beyond reason was plotting not just to take my house, not just my savings, but my dignity, my freedom, my very name. Tears came, but they did not fall like before. They burned, scalding, fueling something inside me that had been asleep for too long. Betrayal twisted in my gut, but alongside it rose something stronger: resolve. They thought I was naive. They thought I was fragile. They thought the years had dulled me. But they were wrong. That night, as the cicadas screamed outside and shadows filled the corners of my home, I made a vow. If Daniel and Vanessa wanted war, I would give it to them. Not with fists or fury, but with intelligence, patience, and a kind of cunning they had never imagined I possessed. For 64 years, I had been the giver, the sacrificer, the silent one. But silence can be a weapon too. And from that moment forward, every smile, every nod, every quiet glance they mistook for weakness would be part of my plan. They wanted to steal my life. They had no idea I was about to take theirs apart piece by piece. That night after the voicemail, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with the lights off, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old wall clock, letting the weight of betrayal sink into my bones. But instead of breaking me, it shaped me. Grief turned to steel, fear to clarity. If Daniel and Vanessa thought I would crumble, they were about to learn they had underestimated the wrong woman. The first step was Miguel, my youngest. The son I had often overlooked, the one Daniel belittled for not wearing a suit and tie. I called him early the next morning. His voice, rough from years in the garage, softened the moment he heard mine. "Mom, are you okay?" I hesitated, then told him part of the truth. Not everything, not yet, but enough. His silence on the line said more than words. "I've got you, Mom," he finally whispered. For the first time in days, I breathed a little easier. Together, we started with the bank. I walked in wearing my red blazer, the one I used to wear on parent-teacher nights when I wanted students to see strength in me. The manager, a woman who had known me for years, looked startled when I laid out the papers. "This signature," I said, firmly pointing, "is not mine." The slant, the hesitation in the pen, stroke, it was Daniel's hand, not mine. I could see the recognition in her eyes as she compared it with my ID. Within an hour, every account was frozen, every access revoked. For the first time in months, my money was safe. Next was Oliver, the good doctor with his condescending smile. I scheduled a routine checkup, playing the part of the confused old woman. But hidden in my purse was a small recorder Miguel had bought me at the electronics store. I asked questions, feigning forgetfulness, pressing him gently until his guard dropped. And there it was, his slip. "Don't worry, Clara," he murmured. "Once the evaluation is signed, everything will be easier for your children. They'll take good care of you." The recorder captured every word, every false reassurance. Proof. But I knew paperwork and recordings weren't enough. I needed a shield, someone who could wield the law with the same sharpness Daniel had hoped to use against me. That's when I thought of Ramirez. Years ago, he was a shy boy in the back of my classroom, always scribbling poetry in the margins of his notebook. His family had nothing. I'd bought him secondhand books, encouraged him when others dismissed him. He had gone on to law school, and I had followed his career from afar with quiet pride. Now he was my lifeline. When I called, his voice carried both surprise and warmth. "Señora Mendoza, after all you did for me, I'll fight for you with everything I have." Still, I stayed silent at home. I smiled at Daniel, let Vanessa rearrange my kitchen, nodded when they whispered about future plans. They thought they were winning. They thought I was blind. But every smile I gave them was a blade I kept hidden, every nod a step closer to their undoing. I let the days pass in silence, wearing my mask like an actress who had rehearsed her role for decades. I smiled when Vanessa brought up selling the house. I nodded when Daniel slid papers across the table, pretending I couldn't quite read the fine print. Every gesture of theirs fed my determination. And when the time was right, I staged my own play, one last performance in the very home they thought they would steal. It was a Friday evening when I invited them over for dinner. The house smelled of roasted chicken, the same meal I had cooked for Daniel on the night he graduated law school. I wore a soft cardigan, let my hair fall loose, and allowed a tremor in my hand to show when I poured the wine. I wanted them to see weakness. I wanted them to believe I was ready to surrender. Daniel leaned forward during dessert, his lawyer's charm laced with poison. "Mom, this is just a formality. If you sign the guardianship papers, we can take care of everything for you. No more stress, no more worries." Vanessa placed her hand on his, nodding, her eyes shining with rehearsed compassion. For a moment, I almost laughed because they truly believed I was cornered. But before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Daniel frowned, irritated. Who could that be? I rose slowly, my knees aching for effect, and opened the door. In stepped Ramirez, tall and resolute, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Behind them was Lucia, my neighbor of 20 years, her gaze steady and unflinching. The room shifted instantly. Daniel's face drained of color. Vanessa's fork clattered against her plate. "Good evening," Ramirez said calmly, placing his briefcase on the coffee table. "We're here to clarify a few things." I sat down in my armchair, finally shedding the disguise. My voice was no longer timid, no longer fragile. "Daniel, Vanessa, you thought I was blind, but tonight you'll see how clear my eyes have been." I pressed play on the recorder. Oliver's voice filled the room. "Once the evaluation is signed, everything will be easier for your children. They'll take good care of you." Vanessa's gasp sliced through the silence. Next came the documents, signatures, forged transactions, unauthorized. Ramirez laid them out like evidence in a trial, his tone sharp and merciless. "Fraud, misrepresentation, conspiracy. The state takes these charges very seriously." Lucia stepped forward, her voice firm. "I've spoken to Clara every day for years. She is not confused. She is not frail. She is as sharp as ever." Daniel tried to protest, words tumbling out, but the officers moved closer. Vanessa burst into tears, her sobs echoing in the living room that had once held birthday songs and Christmas laughter. I looked at them both, my heart heavy but unyielding. "You treated me like a burden, like property to be transferred, like a prize to be claimed. But I am your mother, not your merchandise. And tonight, you will pay the price." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. The night of the confrontation ended with flashing red and blue lights outside my home. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering, pointing. Daniel and Vanessa were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale, their eyes filled with disbelief. For years they thought they had control, but in that moment their empire of lies collapsed like a house of cards. What followed was not quiet, it was a storm. The next morning my phone rang non-stop. Ramirez had already filed the charges, and the district attorney moved swiftly. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The words themselves felt heavy like stones, yet strangely liberating. They were no longer whispered suspicions in my chest. They were facts written in ink, signed by the law. Dr. Oliver did not escape either. Once the recordings were turned over, the medical board acted. His license was suspended pending investigation. I heard later that colleagues who once respected him now avoided his calls. A doctor trusted to heal had instead tried to destroy. and in betraying his oath, he had destroyed himself. Daniel's fall was the most brutal. The law firm where he worked, where I had once bragged about my son with pride, called a press conference within days. "We do not condone or tolerate fraudulent activity," they declared, announcing his immediate termination. His name, once printed on shiny brochures, was now smeared across headlines: "Local attorney charged in elder fraud scheme." Vanessa's punishment came not from courts, but from society itself. The same social circle she had fought so hard to impress turned their backs on her. I overheard whispers in the grocery store. That's her, the one who tried to lock her own mother-in-law away. Her own relatives refused to speak her name. What she once valued most, status, reputation, admiration, crumbled to dust. And then came the reporters. I never sought attention, but the story spread like wildfire. San Antonio mother outsmarts son's cruel plot. Cameras waited outside my porch, asking how I felt. I stood there in my garden, hands steady on the fence, and spoke the truth. I spent my life giving everything to my children. Love, money, sacrifice. And still betrayal came. But I want people to know it is never too late to defend your dignity. Never. Seeing my own words in print the next morning made my chest tighten. Not with fear, but with a strange, quiet triumph. For the first time in years, I was not the victim. I was the woman who had stood her ground. At night, the house was still, but no longer suffocating. I walked through each room, touching the photographs, the walls, the memories. For so long, I had feared losing it all. Now I realized I had already won. My home was mine, not just in deeds and papers, but in spirit. Daniel and Vanessa had tried to erase me. Instead, they erased themselves. After the trials, after the headlines faded, the house that once felt like a fortress of memories began to feel different. Every corner whispered betrayal. Every wall carried echoes of arguments, forged signatures, and hidden schemes. I had defended it, yes. I had kept it from being stolen. But I no longer wanted to live inside its shadows. So I made a choice, a bold one. I sold the big house, the house I had built brick by brick with sweat and sacrifice, and I walked away. With the money, I bought a small apartment in a senior living community on the edge of San Antonio. Some said I was crazy to give up a property worth over $500,000, but I didn't see it as losing. I saw it as shedding old skin. I wasn't clinging to walls anymore. I was choosing freedom. The first morning in my new place, I opened the curtains to a courtyard where other seniors gathered, laughing, stretching, tending to flowers. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not as a burden, not as a possession, but as Clara Mendoza, a woman who had survived. I enrolled in classes I never dreamed I would take. Painting, where my trembling hands found peace in colors I hadn't touched since childhood. Dance, where music carried me back to a lighter version of myself, twirling with neighbors who reminded me that joy has no expiration date. And then something unexpected: I began volunteering. Ramirez helped connect me with a nonprofit that supported elderly victims of fraud. Soon, I was sitting at tables with men and women who looked into my eyes and saw their own stories reflected back. They told me about children who drained their accounts, caretakers who tricked them into signing papers. I shared my story, and more importantly, I showed them how to fight back. A retired teacher had become once again a guide, not with textbooks this time, but with the hard-earned lessons of survival. And Miguel, my Miguel, was by my side through it all. The boy Daniel mocked the son dismissed as the failure was the one who showed me the deepest love. He visited often, fixing little things around my apartment, bringing me tamales from his shop, reminding me that success isn't measured by titles or paychecks, but by loyalty, by kindness, by presence. In his quiet way, he proved that he was the son I could count on, the one who saw me not as a burden, but as his mother. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my balcony and think about blood and family. I think about the saying that blood is thicker than water, but I know now blood alone means nothing. It is love, respect, and justice that bind people together. So I leave you with this: truth family can betray, titles can vanish, houses can crumble, but dignity endures if you dare to defend it. I am Clara Mendoza. I am 64 years old, and I am finally free. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. What emotions did it stir, and where in the world are you watching from? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, And if you enjoy real stories of courage, betrayal, and family truths, don't forget to subscribe to Everyday Family Conflicts for more. Your voice matters here. Let's connect and grow this community together.